Here are the most epic origin stories in history. Ashoka. We are in 304. A DJC and the Mauryan Empire welcomes a new royal child. Loved by his mother, he receives the name of Ashoka. And the emperor, a man named Bindusara, stands nearby and looks at this newborn. In the sun, he sees a not very promising future. Do you see? The emperor already has another son named Tsushima, born from another of his wives. And it is, in fact, him who chose him to become his heir. To add to this, Ashoka's mother was a butcher. Oops! I mean, how did that happen? When Tsushima was a noble. So, yes, the case is closed. But Ashoka is still a royal son, and he received a royal education. Time goes by. Ashoka grows up, and my god, he really seems to become a huge disappointment. He is small, a little fat, and suffers from a kinda strange skin disease, which disgusts his father. Although he has already decided that Tsushima was his name, he is now certain. Ashoka is well trained to be an emperor. Let's see. Look at her! But what Ashoka lacked in appearance, he compensated for it with his charisma and his intelligence. And like most children who know that they are not the favorites, he ends up having a tooth against him. He is taught everything a royal son must learn. And once he is of age, his father begins to send him to govern parts of his kingdom and repress rebellions. Ashoka's first mission was to govern the region of Jin, where he proved to be a master of government policy. And later, he was in charge of repressing the rebellions in Taxla, where he demonstrated a natural aptitude to command an army. It became evident that Ashoka was talented enough to lead the empire, and this did not go unnoticed by the emperor's ministers. They try to tell the emperor, but their opinions are not really important because Bindara has already made his decision. Tsushima must be his heir. But in 273 ADJC, the emperor falls ill and quickly finds himself on his deathbed. Tsushima has gone to fight a rebellion, so he sends him, looking for him to come home quickly so that he can be crowned emperor. But at this stage, the ministers have decided that they prefer They think Tsushima is a spoiled child, and they saw Ashoka kill him, both in power and on the battlefield. So they lie to the emperor and say that Ashoka is sick and cannot go there, and that they should simply name him emperor temporarily while waiting for Tsushima's return. The emperor says to himself, "Did I black?" At that moment, the legend says that Ashoka proclaims, "If the throne belongs to me, the gods will crown me as the next emperor." And that's when Bindara dies, instantly, and Ashoka is made emperor. How convenient? When Tsushima returns to the capital, he is trapped by the ministers and falls into a coal pit, where he dies an atrocious death. Ashoka then leaves and kills each of his other brothers, except one that he liked, to make sure that he would not have any competition. Thus, in 268 ADJC, Ashoka is crowned emperor. He quickly proves that all the ministers of his father were completely wrong and becomes a detracted tyrant who reigns in fear and terror. These atrocities are too many to be listed, but here are some of his greatest successes. He once entrusted his ministers with the impossible task of cutting all the trees into flowers or fruits, and when they failed, he cut off their heads himself. Oh my god! We really should have opted for sushi. That other time, while he was walking in a park with his concubines, he sees a magnificent Ashoka tree, which makes him want to enjoy the afternoon. The concubines are so disgusted to have to touch their disgusting skin that as soon as Ashoka falls asleep, they will cut all the flowers of the tree to make sure that it does not happen again, which I find hilarious. But when Ashoka wakes up and discovers what they have done, he burns them alive, and maybe his ZP of resistance, he built a magnificent palace, which he then filled with the most diabolical and unimaginable torture instruments. Fire pits, fire chambers, fusion metal to be poured into the throats, iridescent walls and ceilings to impale, rotating blades to cut parts of the body, and iron hooks to hang. All this would have been found in the walls of this palace, which has received the name of Ashoka as hell. No one comes out of this palace alive. There was obviously a magnificent garden in front of him. However, now, at this stage, you may be wondering why you are talking about this psychopath. Well, it's because, believe it or not, he is often called today Ashoka the Great, one of the greatest and most beloved leaders in the history of India, and his arc of redemption begins in 262 BC. Ashoka dreams of surpassing his grandfather and father, who managed to enlarge the Mauryan Empire, so that it encompasses almost all of the Indian subcontinent, Afghanistan, and present-day Bangladesh. For his first conquest, he throws his devotee on the kingdom of Kalinga, an uncontested region located on the coast and in India that his grandfather had once tried to take, but without success. The Kalingas were proudly independent people who possessed wealth, trade ports, and a well-trained army, and defeating them would be an important first step to show that he had surpassed his ancestors. Ashoka, therefore, takes an army of 600,000 fantasine, 30,000 horsemen, and 9,000 war elephants, and attacks Kalinga with all the power of the Mauryan Empire. The Kinga, although largely in numerical inferiority, refused to surrender and bravely fight to the end in a desperate but ultimately fruitless attempt to defend their homeland. The war does not last long, but it is literally hell on earth, and death and destruction reach levels never seen before the Second World War. The dying win the war, but at a high price. And when Ashoka goes to the battlefield to lean into his greatness, he is horrified by what he sees. The bodies of more than 100,000 soldiers of King Kalinga die on the ground. Every step he takes plunges him into a swamp of boiling blood. The smell of decomposing flesh is unbearable, and the flies' breasts that cover the corpses are deafening. He sees women, young and old, looking for their husbands, their fathers, and their children among the decomposing bodies. Some are unlucky enough to find their loved ones, and their screams burn Ashoka's ears. He was neither the first nor the last leader to be confronted with the harsh reality of war. But at that moment, he may be one of the few leaders in history to be filled with a deep sense of remorse. Was it the greatness he was looking for? Ashoka leaves the battlefield as a changed man. He will no longer seek glory through war and will fully invest himself in the study of Buddhism. He begins to erect pillars throughout his kingdom with edicts on the way. He wants his people to live in peace and mutual respect, regardless of their cultural or religious origin. During the rest of his reign, he does not embark on other conquests. His only objective was the peace and improvement of the lives of all the inhabitants of his empire. He begins to use the treasure of the empire to build shelters for travelers, plant fruit trees along the main roads to feed the needy, and dig irrigation systems to provide drinking water to all. Thanks to his efforts, Maurya prospers and enjoys peace that lasts for decades. He finances Buddhist missions in India to promote peace in the world, and his efforts spread this philosophy throughout Asia. When India regained its independence from British domination in 1947, Ashoka Chakra was chosen as the central icon of the country's flag. Cyrus the Great. We are in 600 BC, and a king named Hastings is lying in his bed, awake, troubled by a strange dream. In his vision, he saw an ocean of water flow from his daughter, who swept not only his kingdom of Medi, but also flooded all of Asia. The next morning, he is still troubled by this dream and asks his mages for advice, whose interpretation glazes him to the top. The dream was an omen that the progeny of his daughter would one day challenge him for the reign of his empire. To avoid this, he quickly marries her to a Persian king gently named Kisa. Oof! It is impossible for a great conqueror to come from Persia! But only a year after the marriage, Hestia has another dream. This time, his daughter stands before him, and vines suddenly begin to grow in her back. The vines become so large that they cover all of Asia. Age is again panicked, and he goes to see his mages again, who confirmed his worst fears. The son of his daughter will dethrone him and will lead an empire that extends to the four corners of the world. The words of his mages terrify Egypt. And he then decides that he will do everything he can so that this prophecy never comes true. But even before he could think of a plan, his daughter falls pregnant and gives birth to a boy. An intern orders his most faithful general, a man named Arpagus, to go immediately to Persia and kill the child, faithful to his king. The general makes the trip, tears the child from his mother's hands, and moves away while she begs him to stop. Arpagus carries the baby out of town, but looking at the newborn, he realizes that he simply does not have the strength to take the life of a newborn. So he entrusts him to a shepherd and tells him to go and let him die in the woods. As he has been ordered, the shepherd takes the baby and carries it in the woods. But at the behest of Arpagus, the shepherd's wife had just given birth to a dead child. As he plunges into the woods, he fixes the infant in his eyes and cannot help but think of his own child and what could have happened. The shepherd decides to disobey Arpagus and brings the baby home. He and his wife decide to secretly raise him like theirs. They name the boy Agrade, and the shepherd buries their own dead son and tells Arpagus the location of the body. As far as everyone knows, the case is settled. The royal baby is dead. Agrade is therefore raised in the countryside, far from the royal family, totally unaware of his lineage, and becomes a strong and charismatic boy. One day, at the age of 10, he plays with other children, and in their game, he is named king. As king, he gives orders to the other boys, and they all play the game, except this child who is the son of a nobleman. When the child refuses to listen, Agrade orders the other boys to mistreat him to teach him a lesson for not having listened to their king. The noble boy comes home, crying, and denounces Agrade, and the boy's father can't stand this injustice, and he immediately goes to Aegeus to complain and punish this young shepherd. Agrade and his shepherd father are brought to the throne room in the media, and at first glance, Astyages is immediately suspicious. This boy looks very much like him and is the same age as his little dead son. And to crown it all, he speaks and behaves with a class far superior to that of a rotary. He turns to the shepherd and demands the truth. Who is this boy? The shepherd defends himself by saying that it is his son until he is threatened with a severe punishment if he lies, in which case he reveals everything. The king is furious, not so much against the shepherd as against his most faithful general who let him down. Arpagus is summoned to the throne room, and upon entering, he sees the shepherd and the boy, and it is immediately that Arpagus knows that he is useless to lie, so he tells the truth. But surprisingly, the king seems to keep his cool. He tells Arpagus that he often felt bad for killing his little son, and that he is actually a little relieved that he is still alive. I'll tell you, let's go back tonight. Come back later and, oh, could you send your 13-year-old son a little earlier so that my little son is a companion? Arpagus is relieved and goes home to tell his wife and child what is going on. He sends his son to the Palace of Happiness without thinking about it and begins to freshen up for the feast. When his son arrives at the palace, Aegeus orders his soldiers to kill him and cut him into pieces. Some parts of the boy are then roasted and others are boiled. These pieces of cooked human flesh are then arranged on silver plates for later in the evening. During the royal feast, Arpagus is seated with other nobles, and sheep is served to everyone. Arpagus' sheep looks a little different, but the king seems in a good mood, so they all eat. Once everyone is satisfied, he just asks Arpagus for a little help. He calls his servants, who bring a basket and place it directly in front of Arpagus. He orders him to lift the basket. With hesitation, he follows the king's orders and is horrified to see the head and hands of his son. Astig, with a devilish smile, then asks Arpagus if he enjoyed his meal. A little gamey, perhaps? Arpagus realizes with disgust that he has just eaten his own son for dinner. Against all odds, he keeps his cool and simply declares, "Everything my king does pleases me." He asks to keep his son's remains, which he calmly takes and buries at home. But secretly, he never forgives the king and will spend the rest of his life plotting his revenge. Rather proud of the way he treated that idiot Arpagus, Aegeus must now figure out what to do with this grandson, he feared. I mean, he could just kill him and be done with it. But instead, he asks his mage for advice again, who tells him that technically, the prophecy has come true. The boy had become a king in the game he was playing. He no longer poses any threat. Relieved, apologizes to the boy and sends him to be raised in Persia by his biological parents, who are both confused but happy that their son, whom they thought had been dead for 10 years, is still alive. They rename him Cyrus II after his Persian grandfather. In Persia, Cyrus becomes a strong and capable ruler, and when Croesus dies, he ascends the throne and begins to aim for greater conquests. He soon realizes that the greatness he desires will be impossible if he remains under his grandfather's thumb, and he begins plotting ways to regain Persian independence. Back in Media, Arpagus learns that Cyrus might have greater ambitions and sends him a secret message. In his letter, he reminds Cyrus that his grandfather wanted to kill him, and that if Persia led a rebellion against Media, he would turn his forces against the Astagi and fight alongside them. This seems like a pretty good deal, but Cyrus has one final problem. Persia is less a kingdom than a collection of tribes that somehow tolerates a ruler. If he wants to win victory against his grandfather, he must first unite his tribes to fight as a unified army. As the new ruler of Persia, he orders men from all corners of his country to go to a forest and clear it in one day. Unsure what kind of leader Cyrus will be, the men reluctantly comply and are completely exhausted by the end of the day. The next day, Cyrus calls them back to the same spot. The aching men return to the forest, thinking that this Cyrus might need to be dealt with soon if he continues like this. But when he arrives, they are shocked to find Cyrus with an incredible feast laid out in the clearing. They invite them to eat, and instead of working, the men spend the whole day relaxing, drinking, and eating the most delicious food they have ever tasted. As the sun begins to set, Cyrus stands before them and says, "Persians, you have the power to shape your own future. If you follow me, you will enjoy days like today, and even better days without having to endure hard work. But if you go against my plans, you will face trials worse than those you experienced yesterday. I speak to you as the voice of freedom. It seems Providence has chosen me to bring you prosperity. You are just as capable and courageous as your beloved." Knowing this, refuse to continue obeying Astig. The men burst into cheers. Finally, a true leader has come to save them from the tyranny of the Med Empire. With the full support of all the clans of Persia, Cyrus quickly raises an army and leads an all-out assault against his grandfather's forces. Aegis orders Arpagus to command his army to defend his lands and end this revolt. But when the two armies meet on the battlefield, Arpagus does as he promised, turns his men around and begins attacking the remaining master soldiers. Revenge against the Stig has begun. Cyrus, with the help of Arpagus, dethrones his grandfather and establishes what will become known as the Altered Empire, just as the Stig had seen in his dreams. This new empire grows rapidly and, at its height, stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indies, the largest empire the world has ever known. And unlike his grandfather, Cyrus rules with fairness and equality. He is loved by everyone in his territory throughout his reign and long after his death. So much so that he even gets an honorable mention in the Bible for being a cool guy.